All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Ruth Conniff. Ruth is the editor of the Progressive magazine, which you can find at progressive.org. You can also follow her on Twitter at rconniff. Ruth, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Yeah, glad to be here.
All right, so Ruth, there's actually a lot of progressives are not particularly happy with the concept of charter schools, how they're taking all types of money away from public schools, but there actually has been a rather underreported trend going on recently that you write about at the Progressive, and that's the FBI raiding charter schools across the country, and it's what they're finding is pretty shocking. Tell us all about it.
Well, you're right. So this is a really underreported story, and the way that I came across it is through the folks that I've been working with on our new website, Public School Shakedown. We started this website, publicschoolshakedown.org, to bring attention to this really powerful push to privatize public education and the myriad ways in which private interests are trying to find a way to get their hands on money that's intended to fund public schools and turn it into profits or high salaries, in the case of some nonprofit entities, or sales of software and other products that maybe don't meet standards but are expensive for schools to buy and enrich the people who create them. So this is going on in different ways all over the country. But one thing that has happened, you mentioned charter schools being unpopular with progressives. Charter schools, which used to be really small-scale, little alternative education models that were supposed to be replicable in the public schools if they went well, bilingual schools, alternative schools for kids who were not thriving in a traditional classroom setting, they have changed over the last several years as large entities have come in and begun to run basically McDonald's-like chains of schools, paying themselves high administrative salaries, and using a lot of online learning, so it's very cheap, using non-union teachers. Really it's become kind of a racket. And when I use the word racket, it's the first thing that sprang to mind when I began to look at these local news stories across the country of FBI raids on shady charter school operators all over the country, from Connecticut to Louisiana to Arizona to Ohio to Pennsylvania. FBI agents have been going into schools, seizing documents, making arrests. There have been some high-profile indictments. There was one in Hartford, Connecticut that I write about in this piece, where it turned out that the charter school operator was living rent-free in a brownstone paid for by the charter school management company, having tenants who were paying him rent through some of this rent-free space. He was himself a convicted felon who had served 5 years for embezzlement, which somehow didn't come to light when the public began paying him to run this school. They're just real criminal enterprises. And what I think it is over the last decade, what you see is this trajectory downward into basically criminal schemes to get your hands on public money. And the window for that is charter schools. It's a real distortion of what the original mission of charter schools was. But one of the folks that I know who is aware of one of these raids told me that he had spoken to an FBI agent who said, "We have a special division now just to focus on charter schools." And I followed up and spoke with the FBI communications office nationally, and they would not confirm that they had a special unit. But what they did say is, yes, we're working with the Department of Education, and we're taking proactive steps to do something about charter school fraud across the country. And, you can see it just by looking at the stories that I've compiled. I have links to local news stories all over the nation where in the last 2 years, there's been this incredible number of raids by FBI agents on these shady charter school operators.
And then it's really just mind-blowing. It's like Law and Order Charter Schools unit, It's just like, It's so crazy that they actually need an actual law enforcement division, which again kind of gets back to kind of the whole kind of concept as like, why on earth are we doing this to begin with? Why are we adding in this type of like capitalism and profit making on something that is so basic to just the general good of the entire society, and the fact that we all agree that we should be educating our children. That's something that's just at the very, very basic level of humanity. But we're adding this this insane profit motive to it, and of course, this should be foreseen that there's going to be all types of corruption, and so like go into some of the details about some of the. I mean, you talked about it a little bit. Talk a little bit about some of the corruption that's going on and what these raids have actually found. What do we actually know about these things that are happening so far?
Well, there was a recent story in The Atlantic about the Gulen charter schools, which is the largest charter school chain in the country, run by a secretive Turkish imam, actually. He's been targeted by the FBI for misuse of public funds. And those schools are all over the country. So he's using public funds to send people on junkets to Turkey and to fund other nonprofits that other arms of his empire, basically. So that was kind of a splashy story, particularly now, because it's a Muslim organization. But, The Atlantic very responsibly hastened to add that this is not a violent or militant Muslim organization. They're pacifists. Right. They're internationalists. They're basically a religiously friendly group. However, they're sucking up a lot of money out of the Chicago area and other Midwestern states to do some questionable things. That's one. One that really stuck out to me is in Albuquerque. The FBI raided a couple of schools because people were taking money out of a secondary school and funneling it into a flight school. Here's some of what's going on that's very odd, I think, with this idea that we need to reform education and bring in a business model. You have this rich guy in Albuquerque who's a pilot, and he has a company that manufactures airplanes. Well, he's figured out he can run an elementary school, a high school, and a flight school, and he can use public funds to purchase airplanes from his own company, pay himself a couple of $100,000 in salary. And, it's a good racket for him. He's basically taking tax dollars from a local community they're supposed to fund kids' education, and he's figuring out a scheme through which he can, funnel this money into his private business. That school was raided. He was arrested. The list goes on and on. Baton Rouge, all over Louisiana. Louisiana, New Orleans now has the nation's only all charter school district. And it's an open door for shady operators because they're not subject to the same kind of rules and oversight as public entities. And we've seen, as a result, schools that don't exist listed as charter schools, and somebody's getting an administrative salary, for doing something that they're not doing. Money is disappearing, $5 million in local, state, and federal tax money disappeared in Baton Rouge because of something called the Pelican Group, which is a charter school operator there. It's just all over the country. It's one news story after another.